Hello, and welcome to Wellness Wednesday with 3W. Wellness Wednesday is sponsored by 3W Medical for Women, a nonprofit medical clinic offering free of charge or low-cost women's health services in the Seattle area, regardless of income or insurance status. 3W does not profit off of the health choices women make. The information shared in this podcast is the opinion of the speaker or speakers. Medical information is not intended as individual medical consultation, but for general education only. Always talk to or consult your own health professional for personalized advice regarding medical decisions. And if you're in the Seattle area, consider making an appointment to consult with us. I'm Helen Nguyen, CEO of WAMS/3W Medical for Women, and the host of today's podcast. Hi there, Wellness Wednesday listeners. This is Helen Nguyen, yours truly, here in the studio. And I feel like we've been talking a lot about heavy topics these days, but you know what? The world feels heavy, so we're just going to go with it. And today I have with me a guest. Her name is Brea, and she's going to be talking about a pretty tough topic, pretty heavy, pretty deep. So just a heads up disclaimer, and she's going to be walking us through her personal story as a victim of sex trafficking. I've gotten to know Brea, through various channels, through various people, and it just makes me think of like, you don't know people's story, you don't know people's path in life, and I'm just so grateful to Brea to come on today to our podcast to share her story. So welcome, Brea. Thank you for coming on to our 3W podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Brea, this is going to be a pretty tough topic. Is there a way that we should say, like, I want you to be very open to saying whatever you needed to say, but is this probably not the most appropriate podcast for anyone too young to listen to, do you think?
To an extent, yeah. I mean, there'll definitely be heavy things. In some ways, I feel like, it depends on it. But I mean, sharing it with people who are, like high school age is probably the best age because it's something that they need to be aware of too, which will probably come up. But I mean, that's an age where, high schoolers especially are, targeted in some ways, in lots of different areas. So yeah, I would say late middle school, high school.
Okay. All right. Well, for those parents out there, just a heads up. Okay, Brea, please introduce yourself. Why did you decide to come onto our podcast to share the story of yours, and where are you from? What are you doing?
Yeah, so I wanted to talk to you guys today just because there's so much trafficking, and we'll get into this too, but there are just so many voices that will likely never be heard, right?
Yeah.
And stories like mine for various reasons, whether they're not around to share their story or whether they're still stuck in trafficking, or even if they do get out, they'll never emotionally recover from what they've been through in a capacity in which they're truly willing to share.
Yeah.
So I grew up on the west side of the state in, small towns, moved around a little bit over the years, but grew up on the west side of the state. And then I'm now on the east side in the greater Wenatchee Valley. I've been here for about the last 5-ish years, 4.5, 5 years now, which I have loved.
Yeah.
Worked a variety of jobs, done everything from zipline guiding to fancy hotels, and now working at a really amazing clinic here, kind of similar to your guys's.
Yeah.
I've been super enjoying that and being able to just be a part of an organization that's helping at-risk women who need various services. So that's been super duper fun to be able to work there and bring my story and my experience to help bring education for women with similar stories to mine ever walk through the door. So that's been a real blessing to be a part of that.
Awesome. So let's just dive into your story, because it's a story of heartbreak, but much redemption at the end as well. Can you just walk us through the beginning of this experience of yours?
So I grew up with divorced parents, just to kind of set the scene. They had me, got married, got divorced. And so they got divorced when I was around 2 years old. So I always grew up with divorced parents. I never knew parents together. I primarily lived with my mom, and then I would go to my dad's on the weekend and that sort of thing. My mom was kind of into the party scene. I would never consider her like a super like drug addict or anything. But basically, like whatever crowd she was in, she just did what the crowd did. Very passive aggressive. Same thing goes with any boyfriend she was with or anything like that. whatever they lean towards in really any category, she would also lean towards that category. And I had experienced abuse from like pretty young ages, probably like 4 or 5, in varying levels. But it was when I was about 8 years old. She had a new boyfriend, a local produce guy at the grocery store,
Mm.
and they were together. We lived in a little trailer on my grandparents' property up in the
Mhm.
woods. And it was during that time that then I began where I would end up watching them have sex because it was a small trailer. I originally, when he would sleep over, I would sleep in the bathtub for a little while because there wasn't
Mm.
running water in there. Don't recommend sleeping in a bathtub. It's not good for your back.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I eventually ended up moving out to kind of like a little seating area that they had in front of a big window. And then that's where I would end up watching them have sex because it's a small trailer.
Mhm.
And then from there, that transitioned where, if my mom was gone, he would start to abuse me. And then it was from that point to where he ended up taking me to, what I considered basically his house for the first time, where there were a couple other traffickers, pimps, and a couple other girls. So that's really where everything started. It was around
Mhm.
the age of 8
Mm.
where I began to be trafficked out. And I mean, it just seemed so normal to me. I didn't know anything different. Like, that was just the only life I'd experienced.
Mhm.
And I didn't go to friends' houses super often. There was one other, boy who lived up on the mountain that I'd hang out with. But so I didn't have anyone to compare my story to. And I know that even it wasn't too long after it had started, the one time where I remember kind of just like having a conversation with someone. It was another girl in my class, and we were talking, and I just remember like that we knew that this was happening to both of us or like similar stuff, and we were like kind of validating our story with each other of like, hey, like this is happening to you too. And
Mhm.
like I don't remember the full details of the conversation, and it was, in third
Mhm.
grader
Mhm.
language. But,
Mhm.
and then years later, I think it was when we were on the sixth grade, it came out that she had been raped by her father almost every night from like the age of 5 and up.
Gosh.
And I just remember her and I, like, because when I found out that news, I was like, I knew that. Like, that
Mm.
didn't come as a surprise to me.
Mhm.
And then I remembered that we had had that conversation of just mutual, like, oh yeah, like this is normal and this is happening to both of us.
So,
So
during that time, were you going to school?
yeah, I was a straight A student. Technically, it was like a 1, 2, 3, 4 system, but always top grades. And
Yeah.
I mean, I was quirky. I grew up with a bunch of hippies,
Uh-huh.
so like very much mountain hippies, peace signs, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I would go to school wearing like crazy, outfits, rainbow robe, big leg warmers, that sort of stuff. So I mean, I was super quirky in school,
Okay.
and my teachers probably knew that I had a rough past. It was a small town, so a lot of my teachers, like some of them had even had my mom as a kid in school, or like some of my teachers were classmates with my grandma back in the day. Very
Okay.
small town, so people knew everyone and knew my family for sure.
Did they not know what was going on?
No, I
Okay.
mean, I was a normal kid. I smiled, I laughed, I had a good time, I was goofy.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, for me especially, I poured myself into school instead of withdrawing. I think there's definitely cases where people, kids will start to struggle in school, and that can be a sign. Like the other girl that I had talked with, I mean, she totally withdrew, fell
Yeah.
into the wrong crowd, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
That was never my experience, and I think it was just something that God gave me from a young age, even before I was a believer, of just like one, surrounding myself with the right people, but like two, just like seeing the lifestyle I was in and knowing that that's not what I wanted, even though I didn't know what else was out there. My family's big into smoking weed, that sort of
Yeah.
thing. And I,
Yeah.
from a young age, was like, I am never going to smoke weed. So
Yeah.
I just had these resolves that like, I am not going to do that.
Mm.
And, for some of those things. And I knew that no one in my family, I mean, very few of my family members have graduated high school. No one's gone to college. I now have one cousin who went and dropped out. But
Yeah.
so, I mean, just such a lack of education. And I could see that in their lives. And so I was just determined. I was like, I'm going to be a straight A student. I wanted to be a teacher growing up.
Mhm.
Always, that was the only career path I had ever wanted, was to be a
Mm.
teacher up through like middle school, early high school. But
Mhm.
so I mean, it was just determined. And so I poured myself into school. I did sports,
Mm.
you know, played football. I was the only girl on the football team for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Played basketball for a while, did some dance, did softball. And it was really just at night when I'd go home, my mom's boyfriend would pick me up, take me to his house. I
Yeah.
would do what I was there to do, and then I would go home, get a couple hours of sleep, and go back to school. And that was just all I knew. And then I would go to my dad's house on the weekend. My dad had no idea that I was being trafficked. I mean, he just wasn't a super attentive father. I wouldn't say he was completely absent, at least at that point in my life.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd go and play golf, we'd go fishing, we would do things together. But I mean, that's one thing with divorce is you just don't know what's going on at the other house.
Right.
And so that was just kind of a reality of the situation.
And you never once told him what was going on? Like it
No,
wasn't a
'cause
need to tell him
why would
anything?
I?
Yeah.
No. I mean, and the other thing is like, especially with like divorced parents, like when I was younger, I was always the messenger. I remember when I was young, it would be like my mom would be like, "Hey, like go tell your dad this."
Mhm.
You know, when they're
Mhm.
dropping me off, exchanging me. And so I'd run over to my dad's car. "Hey, she says she wants, you know, to pick me up at this time on this day." And he's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, we'll tell her this." And I'd run literally back and forth. It
Right.
wasn't until I was older that I was like, "Wait a minute. You guys both have mouths. You can talk to each other, okay?" Like,
Yeah.
I'm tired of this. This is annoying.
Right.
Anyway, and so, I mean, I wouldn't really talk about what went on at my mom's house, and I wouldn't talk about what went on. I mean, I would talk more so about what I did at my dad's house with my mom
Yeah.
because we would do things, right? Whereas like my mom and I didn't really do things that much. She
Mhm.
was gone a ton. My grandma's really the one who raised me, but even
Mhm.
my grandparents didn't really know because I mean, there was a level of being blocked out once that boyfriend came into my
Mhm.
mom's life. He
Mhm.
just like became very controlling, domineering, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so even though my grandparents are super involved, I mean, my grandparents, when we didn't live with them, my grandma would drive, you know, down off her mountain and come to our house to get me ready for school every morning
Wow.
because my mom didn't want to get up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean, like just superstar grandma, you
Yeah.
know, and it's super sad because I've talked with my grandma a little bit now, and like, you know, because she kind of knows what happened to an extent anyway. And I mean, just so brokenhearted. My grandma experienced a lot. Like she, you know, is very broken. She would not tell, you know, you ever what she went through. She'll only tell you a couple stories that are,
Yeah.
you know, like for her mild experiences that are
Yeah.
like cheapers, like getting picked up and like seeing a girl in the back of this guy's truck and like clubbing the driver and being like, you know, we got to get out of here. It's like cheapers, grandma.
Wow.
Remind me not to get in a fight with you. So anyway, so
Yeah.
my grandma was super resolved to not let anything happen to any of her grandkids. And so like despite even all of her efforts, I mean, wasn't able to prevent anything,
Mm.
which is really unfortunate. I mean, that's where it really comes down to the parents too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So did your mom know what was going on?
yeah.
Okay.
Like I said, she's very passive, right? I would not ever say that it was her leading. I don't think it was ever her idea.
Yeah.
But I mean, she wasn't going to tell her boyfriend no. And that's pretty much just like the name of the game with her. And then once it started, they ended up breaking up like a year, probably a year or so into their relationship. And within that, like when they broke up, it was basically now like there were these other guys with this thing started. And so she was like, well, I'm not going to say no. And so it's just very, very passive. We didn't really talk about it either. It just kind
Okay.
of was what happened. And that
Yeah.
was really just like the reality of the situation.
So how long did this go on?
So from the age of 8 to till 17. And for the
Okay.
majority of that, I didn't even know what trafficking was. To
Yeah.
be honest, like I had no idea that that was a thing. And secondly, like I didn't know what rape was until the 8th grade. Like
Okay.
no clue. And mind you, I always say that you could completely take trafficking out of my story and my story would still be pretty gnarly. Like
Yeah.
there's still so much. I mean, there was tons of abuse outside of trafficking because her lifestyle, like my mom's lifestyle, was just bringing in bad people all the time,
Mhm.
right? And so
Mhm.
within that, I mean, there's so much to it. But yeah, so 8 to 17, and it wasn't until I was older that I even realized fully what was going on. And I mean, I you know, I'm a Christian and I was a believer, became a believer around 13, 14. So like I knew God and was still involved with it for like 3 or 4 years before I, you know, fully could even comprehend of like the extent of what was going on.
So in a way, do you think it was your coping mechanism of just like this is normal, this is just life, this is just what happens?
Well, there's also like, especially with severe abuse in young children, there's an aspect of dissociation that plays into it, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, where I was able to just separate myself from what was happening, especially because, like, during trafficking, you're often given a different name. You very rarely will go by your actual name.
Yeah.
And so mine was Jasmine. That's what I went by. There was Jasmine and there was Audrey, and they didn't mix, especially in the older years, you know, where I was just super involved in that lifestyle. It was like I could, you know, be trafficked all night, be with how many men. I go to bed, I wake up in the morning, and I couldn't tell you what had happened the night before because it was just so separated. My brain had compartmentalized it so much that it was like two different people living two different lifestyles. And I think that's really how you make it through for so long.
Yeah.
And for me, I was never like, I was given drugs throughout the years, but I was never like a drug addict. Somehow I never got addicted, never an alcoholic, anything like that. I still have never smoked weed, which I'm like, hoorah, it's like the one thing I haven't done.
Wow.
But anyway, and so yeah, it was just like, two different people living two different lifestyles. And especially without any kind of substance, I think that was probably the only way that I got through it. And I was a straight A student, enrolled in school, doing sports or whatever, until I think it was about my sophomore year. Halfway through, I had ended up getting kicked out a second time, and that's when my grades finally started to drop. But like I held high grades. I was part of the honor society when I graduated. I've been given tons of awards throughout the years at schools and that sort of thing. And I think that was for me too. Like that was what I grabbed onto was school. I was like, school is my safe place. I'm going to be at school as much as I possibly can.
Did you not feel safe enough to tell your teachers what was going on?
Well, why would I need to? It's normal.
Okay.
I didn't realize that it was this like big bad, scary thing.
Yeah.
That was just my life and that was just what I did, and you don't talk about it, you just do it.
Okay.
And there's an aspect too of like, especially in the beginning, there's so much grooming, especially I feel like when you have children who are being trafficked.
Yeah.
The pimps will just go through extreme measures to be able to, groom you and that sort of thing of just, you don't tell people.
Yeah.
I remember they had someone, whether or not it was a real law enforcement officer or not, I don't totally know, but they had someone come in, looked like a law enforcement officer, and, interrogating us and like all these different things. And that whole experience of that officer coming in resulted in one of the girls dying. Like just extreme measures to say, like, you don't talk to the cops, you don't talk to people. So, that was just such a big part of it. And like also just like being fully willing to do what the pimps tell you. Throughout my years, I was involved in like 3 different groups. Okay. There was a group when I was younger, and then middle school, I moved. They ended up selling me to another group. I don't know if they were connected or not, or like that sort of thing. And then I ended up getting sold back.
How does that happen? Like, how do you know you were sold?
Primarily for me and how it worked was my mom needed to move, and so she told them that. And so basically then the pimps sold the rights to me to a different group. The other group paid a sum to get me as a unit. But that's the tricky thing with trafficking of like, and this sounds so terrible. I'm kind of desensitized to all of it because it was my life. But like the reality is sex trafficking is so unique in its industry because with drugs, you sell drugs, they're gone, right? Well, with a kid, with a girl, you sell that girl 10 times a night, 10 times the next night, 10 times the next night. And they're renewable income. They they never go away.
Right.
So the price of being sold, is crazy. So
do you know how much you were sold for?
No, I don't know like those numbers or anything. And you really don't ask.
Yeah.
Like conversations.
Well, how can you? You were a kid.
Yeah, I would, easily, over 10 grand. Most pimps will profit like probably at least like $100,000 off of each girl that he has, like over the course of the year. I haven't like totally blocked out that math, but that would not surprise me whatsoever. Because you sell them over and over and over again. And the more people come, the more of a demand it is, right? Same with porn. That's what's so terrible about porn is you watch it once and then you need more and you need more. You need more. And then at some point porn doesn't become enough for somebody. And so then they need to take it into the real world. Well, that's when they start trafficking. They might start with an adult woman, right? Well, then they want it a little younger. Then they want it a little younger. And as for like the age of, the other kids and girls, there was one boy throughout the years that I was trafficked. Other than that, girls. So I'll speak primarily to the girls to keep it easy.
Yeah.
But I've seen from literally a newborn, I've watched someone give birth in a trafficking situation up until the age of 17. So any age of a child is within there. And then when they turn 17, they end up getting sold to a group with all adults because they're now too old to be sold in the group with the kids. And sometimes that happens earlier. It's wild.
Yeah.
So
I don't know what to say. I don't know.
That's okay. That happens.
I don't know what to like. Yeah, I don't know where to go from here to ask. It's like I don't want to know because it's just too horrifying.
Well, one other thing that I find that is really interesting, and just as for like myths, because this is one of my things personally about why I feel the need to speak, is because there are so many myths around trafficking,
Yeah.
right? Like if you say like sex trafficking, you ask, any person on the street, I almost guarantee you that they will tell you that it happens in foreign countries to foreign children. That's not something that happens here. Or
Yeah.
maybe with really rich people because of the recent stuff that's kind of coming out that that's such a part of, Hollywood and like, all these
No,
big name people
it's
and that sort of
totally
thing.
in our backyard. It's
It's everywhere.
totally
And that's
yeah.
like with porn. If
Yeah.
porn is there, trafficking is there too. Like,
Yes.
I guarantee you. There were 24 other kids, not a single one of them was from a foreign country. Not one. The ways that they get into it, there's, familial trafficking like me,
Yeah.
where your parents are involved in some capacity or another. I think when they're young, it's probably almost always some sort of familial trafficking. Kidnapping is a thing, but I think it's a very small thing, especially in the grand scheme of things, and in the
Okay.
grand scheme of things in the U.S.
Okay.
I think that kidnapping is definitely, you see videos of kids literally just be, grabbed and taken off the streets. I
Yeah.
think that's more of a foreign country thing. I mean, can it happen here? Yes. Do I think it's the norm? No. I think with young children, it's almost always a family member or a close friend being involved somehow in the beginning, or the lack thereof, right? So, like the foster care system, homelessness, like that sort of thing. Anytime where like an adult is not paying attention, it just dramatically opens the door for trafficking to happen. Once you get a little older, towards, I would say, that late middle school, high school age, that's when, texting, you have your phone, there's all these apps and chats, and that's when adult men will start to message,
Yeah.
younger girls,
Yeah.
start to talk. Sometimes they'll pose as someone younger,
Yeah.
or sometimes they won't, but then it's like, hey, well, like, let's meet up, you know, let's meet up,
Yes.
and then they'll meet up and then they'll, or run away with me. So they meet up to run away, go away for one night. The first night's great. And then after that, they're being trafficked.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a relatively, I would say, probably common experience.
Oh, jeez.
That's a part of all of that. Or, I mean, sometimes it's even friends, like a friend, I mean, that's why you have to be cautious even in school, of like, because girls will recruit other girls in the school system, because
Yeah.
these girls aren't locked away in cages all the time and that sort of thing. Most of the time they're free to come and go.
Right.
Not all of the time.
Right.
It really depends on the situation, but like, I mean, I was free to come and go for the
Yeah.
most part.
Yeah.
I mean, there was what was expected of me, when to
Right.
be there, all that kind of stuff. But I mean, especially with adults and that sort of thing, or even an adult women, just because they're a girl doesn't necessarily mean they're safe,
Right.
which is so unfortunate, right? Because
Right.
usually you're like, oh, well, it's a woman. I trust a woman.
Right.
But
Right.
I mean, they'll be like, hey, like, I got this guy for you to meet. He's so great,
Yeah.
yada, yada.
Yeah.
Or the other thing about trafficking is there's different scales to it to an extent, right? They all end up in the same result, but there's like, kind of the stigma of this formalized ring, right? It's a ring, there's a bunch of pimps, they have lots of girls. That totally exists. Not a super huge scale, but like I've seen and experienced that. And then there's also a boyfriend and a girlfriend, and the boyfriend is selling his girlfriend to his friends.
Yeah.
Even if it's only one other guy, that constitutes as trafficking.
Yeah.
And so I mean, there's that range of it as well, which is why it's so complex,
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not a simple topic that's, a cookie cutter issue with a cookie cutter solution.
Yeah. When you were sold to people, was it always for sex?
Pretty much, or some form of sexual activity.
Okay.
The other aspect of it that's also not talked about a ton is it's called SRA, satanic ritual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is, and I won't go too much into this, mainly for people, listening,
Yeah.
because I mean, it's an
Yeah.
extreme topic, but
Right.
also the cults and
Yeah.
trafficking are very well connected,
Sure.
right? Because I mean, ultimately, most cults know that what they're doing is like not okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
at the head. And so who are they gonna, reach out to when they need a girl for something? They're gonna, that's not in their community or whatever. They're gonna reach out to trafficking because that's where they can, basically rent a girl for a night or whatever it may
Yeah.
be. That's the only part of it that like might kind of not be in the sexual realm. But I mean, generally speaking, in the sexual realm or the abuse realm physically, right? This point's kind of extreme, but renting a punching bag for the night,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
usually there's some kind of sexual activity involved in that. But
Okay.
I mean, the physical abuse is also a big part of it that ties into the sexual abuse.
What was your experience like in that early stage of grooming? What did that look like?
Yeah, I mean,
Was it gifts?
there's no that would be nice if it was gifts. I think
Oh,
I
jeez.
think the gift side of the equation is probably more for older, right? You
Okay.
want to win over their affections first. Well, when you're 8 years old, like I don't care about nobody's affection. I was a super shy kid. Prior to any abuse, like I was like a hide behind my mom or grandma's leg kid. So I mean, I wasn't just going to be opening up to strangers. So within that, I mean, it's like being locked in a closet, being, sometimes there was even cages and they'd put you in the cage and leave you there, or lack of food or anything, basically making you completely dependent on the pimp and what he says and what he does. And I know that when I got sold to the second group that I was a part of, like their kind of initiation, so be it. They took, I don't know where exactly we went, but took us out into the woods and they had me put on a blindfold and stand there and they're like, don't move. And they didn't tell me why, they just said, don't move. And then they started shooting guns. They said, don't move, you know? And then, so they were shooting, and I don't know if they're aiming at me, not aiming at me. And eventually they had me take off the blindfold. And then they're pointing them at me just on either side of my head, right? So, I mean, within that, you just have to completely rely and trust them, right? And it becomes this dependency on them. Because the other part of it is as you begin to, be with however many guys a night and that sort of thing, there are situations where like the John that you're with will, kind of step out of line of the bounds he was given, right? Like if a guy starts getting way too aggressive, then it's like you holler and a pimp will come in and be like, hey, not cool, man. So they also become your protection, even though they're also the direct reason you're being harmed. So you really have to have a good relationship with them to be able to, live.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's just super intense all
Yeah.
around.
Yeah. How did that not mess you up psychologically as a young person?
It's just that separation.
Okay.
Somehow, God allowed my brain to just be so separated of it was like two different people. And the other thing is I didn't know life outside of that, right?
Yeah.
Like that was just the life I experienced. I didn't know to what degree other people were or weren't experiencing it. I mean, towards middle school is when I started to like kind of, realize that something's probably off.
Yeah.
Started struggling with depression, but I mean, I really never got into anything that crazy other than like depression and suicidal thoughts. Like that was really like the most intense. Like never went to drugs. I mean, I also used to spite my stepdad because my mom got remarried when I was in around like the 7th grade. Same with my dad. He also got remarried. So then I was living with my mom and stepdad. This is while I was involved in that second group. And my stepdad, super mean person, never physically or sexually abusive, but very verbally abusive and very aggressive. I mean, I also, despite being trafficked, I had grown up in a very chill environment. It was very much I could do whatever I wanted. There were no rules. Like I didn't have to respect my mom. I mean, she would ask me to take out the trash and I'd be like, no. And that would be the end of the conversation. So I mean, there was just no rules, no regulations, that sort of thing. And so when we moved in with him, he decided to be like drill sergeant and he was going to teach me, which I was generally speaking like outside of probably with my mom, I think I had just lost most of my respect for her because of the situation she had put me in.
Yeah.
But outside of that, I mean, I was a super respectful kid. Grandma taught me to say please and thank you. And if grandma was around, I was very respectful.
Yeah.
If it was just my mom, I could kind of care less. I mean,
Yeah.
most of my teachers like wanted to take me home. They're like, "Are you up for adoption? Because I want you."
Yeah.
I mean, super respectful, super sweet. But yeah, so my stepdad just decided like he's like, "You're just gonna eat all these vegetables," because I'd grown up eating box food, and he's all like super health conscious. Again, a hippie. He's like out there like smoking all these cigarettes, and he grew weed. He told me when I moved in, he's like, "Oh yeah, I've been shot and stabbed before." And again, we were up on a mountain, kind of isolated. And I'm like, "That's super cool. Glad
Yeah.
to know that." super fun. And so I would go and steal his cigarettes and smoke them just to like prove a point and be like, fight me, bro. What you gonna do? I mean, he never caught me. He always told me he would catch me if he ever caught me stealing his weed, his alcohol, because he would drink a ton. So I remember I used to like just steal a bunch of his alcohol. I never drank it because I didn't actually want to get drunk. But
Yeah.
I was like, I'm forced to do that enough. Like I don't want to do that on my own accord. And so I would just steal it and hide it. And then eventually I like after like having it for like 6 months, I was like, okay. So I just started like slowly giving it back to him.
Yeah. So when you were being trafficked at such a young age, what happened to your body? Like, was there things that happened to your body that you were like, why is this? You
I
probably had
started
to.
puberty very young.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at. Is like you would have to. Things had to change pretty drastically, quickly, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I started puberty at around 8 or 9 years old, somewhere right in there. So not long after I was being trafficked, which I mean, I'm no doctor, but it makes sense just the amount, that I was being used. I mean, sometimes it's up to like 10 guys a night. It would not be like crazy, I mean, that's probably like the max. So in that, just, as a little kid, like I think it just has to like jumpstart your system.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, started puberty pretty young, got my period, all that kind of stuff. So that was like the biggest thing. And then the reality is too, I'll speak a little more generically here, but like pregnancy and like that sort of thing is such a big part of the trafficking world as well. Like I mentioned earlier, I've helped deliver a baby into being trafficked. I mean, that's not uncommon. Usually once you're on your period and like that sort of thing, I mean, they do have birth control that they'll give some girls, not all of the time. Morning after pill
Yeah.
was super commonly taken. I mean, some of these I can't like be super accurate in saying how much or that sort of thing, because the reality is if you were given a pill, you would take it. Like you don't ask what it is. Or like if someone wants to inject you with a needle, you let them. You do what you're told and you don't ask questions, right?
What
Just
happens if you don't?
you'll get thrown down onto the ground, you'll get locked in a cage, or you'll have sometimes there's guys who are just much more physically aggressive and they'll allow those physically aggressive guys to come through and get out that physical aggression. So and you kind of know that too. I mean, in super extreme cases, this is another part that I feel like is not talked about very often. But I mean, the life expectancy of a trafficked victim is 7 years. So within that, murder plays a huge role in trafficking. Most people end up dying in trafficking because they also say that 1% make it out
Yeah.
of trafficking. So of 100, 99 are not going to make it out and one will. Well, what happens to the 99 if they're not making it out? They die in trafficking, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, whether that be from overdoses or, from like an accident of, something getting too rough, or like, I mean, there would be guys who would pay. And again, I don't know how much, but a girl is a renewable resource. So by taking that away, right, that has to be a good amount. But guys who would pay for the right to come in and basically murder one of the girls that was being trafficked. So I mean, the consequences vary, in extremity. I mean, I probably had a ton of concussions that never went diagnosed, right, from being thrown around. I know I started going to a chiropractor. And I remember they asked me, they took my X-rays, and they're like, "Hey, like, have you ever been in a car accident or that sort of thing?" Nothing like that. And they're like, "Oh, that's really weird. You have like super extreme whiplash." My neck was like curved weird because they're like, "Have you ever been like like shaking around?" And I was like, "Oh, yes." Like, and so, then I gave my story and that sort of thing. And they're like, but yeah, so I mean, there's a ton of that's involved. And I mean, you know, STIs are a thing that happens within that. I mean, and again, I don't know how much of that like was treated or not, because it's just like an ebb and flow. I do know that like pimps will try to minimize STIs as much as they're able, because the reality is, I mean, I would say 50% of the men at least that were coming in had a ring on their finger, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you have a married man, right, who's supposedly supposed to be, with one woman only, they come and they're buying girls. Well, if they get an STI and bring it home, where's it coming from,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So within that, I mean, there is, a desire to keep things clean, as odd as that might sound. And so, I mean, they would go in for, STI testing, that sort of thing. They would, give you pills, give you shots, give you whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
And again, that's where it's hard for me to know the specifics, because you do what you're given and then you take what you're taken, you know? So, I mean, that's a big part of it for sure.
Did you ever become pregnant?
Yeah, multiple times. So it was not uncommon for that to happen. And the other thing too is because of your cycle.
Yeah.
Your cycle is all over the place, right? And so it's
Yeah.
super hard. Like it's not like you just know like, oh, well, right now I'm ovulating.
Yeah.
Because you'd go 6 months without your cycle and
Yeah.
you wouldn't know if you were pregnant or just missing your cycle or
Yeah.
whatnot. Within that, you could end up getting decently far along
Yeah.
without anybody realizing. And so then that's when the pimps decide, like, okay, like, is it going to be an abortion or is this one we're going to let, you know, carry to term?
Yeah.
So I've never carried any kids to term or like that sort of thing. But again, like one of the gals that I was there with, you know, she went full term.
Yeah.
I was there, helped her deliver the baby. And as far as I know, that little girl is still in trafficking.
Yeah.
So the little girl was, I think, like one or two when I left. So
Okay.
yeah, it's a part of it for sure.
Okay. Did you ever contracted any STIs?
Not that I know of, but like I wouldn't have been surprised if I did. Somehow, Lord willing, when I left, I didn't have any. So, I mean, I think that's truly just a miracle from the Lord. But yeah, I mean, that's got to be a part of it. That's something that like it's not like you really talk about with the other girls. It's not like an advertised part of the gig.
Yeah.
So, again, that's where it's hard to know. But I mean, there was a doctor that would come in and you know sometimes run different tests on us or you know that sort of thing, be involved. You know, they would take the girls to his clinic if they needed like an abortion.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that was a part of it. The abortion pill, I mean, was taken quite frequently. Like if they found out you were pregnant, it would not be uncommon for them to hand you a pill and be like, here, take this. And I mean, I've been with 11-year-old girls who are miscarrying, you know, holding their hands or consoling, you know, a 15-year-old after they come back from getting a forced abortion surgery. And I feel like once you get older, there's usually almost one to two pregnant women. When I was a little bit older, 16, 17, there was a group down in California, and that's where I was going to be going if I didn't leave. So that's part of why it's part of the story of why I ended up leaving to an extent, but because I was getting older, right? And so basically they were bringing me down to see if this group wanted me once I became, you know, of age and was an adult and that sort of thing. And there were a couple women at different stages of pregnancy because pregnancy is a fetish for guys, right? Like a pregnant woman. And the reality is that there are multiple ways you can either keep the baby and then have, you know, that renewable resource, or you can sell it and make a ton of money.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go either way. But the thing in trafficking, any kids that are born into trafficking, they have no identity, right? So no one's ever going to be looking for them, right?
Yeah.
Like that's never going to be a thing. So they profit off of it greatly by letting you keep your baby.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're younger, usually people, you know, aren't into kids who are pregnant. Like that's just not quite as much of a thing.
Yeah.
But like with adult women, it is more of a thing. In places that have primarily adult women,
Yeah.
pregnancy, you know, is more often allowed to go to term.
Yeah.
Because they benefit from it.
Were you more popular when you were younger than when you got older?
It's hard to say because of the different groups I was in. Because the group that I started out in was pretty lower scale.
Okay.
We're like 2 or 3 guys and 2 or 3 girls.
Okay.
You know, so it's pretty minor. I was trafficked a lot more during that time, like during the week. Whereas then when I was in like middle school, just was kind of how everything was set up at the time. I would primarily go on the weekends. I wouldn't really go during the week as much. So I'd end up going and staying the weekend with traffickers
Yeah.
and then just working like a couple days all day sort of a thing. And then I'd go back home during the week and not be trafficked. But I mean, that's when then there was all kind of stuff going on in my house, which, you know, that's a whole other part of the story. But then when I was in high school was then when I started to be trafficked more because I had moved again. I had gotten kicked out of my mom's house when I was 14, my mom and stepdad. I also have a little sister. She was born when I was 14. We're my mom's only kids. Huge age gap. So that's with my stepdad. She's my half sister. So anyway, yeah, got kicked out when I was 14, moved in with my dad for like a couple months. He ended up kicking me out. And then I lived with my grandpa, my dad's dad. And that's when things really started to pick up again because there was just no one monitoring me, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, my dad kind of tried to do some of that, but I mean, to a huge extent, like no one was paying attention to me. So that's when it really started to pick up again. So it's kind of hard to say whether or not I was popular when I was younger, just due to being in different groups. Because the group that I ended in was by far like the most, a ring, you have your pimps and then you have more girls and that sort of thing. So that group was definitely the most established.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, it varied, there was definitely demand for the younger girls. And that's another tricky part of it, is because when you're in that system, right, with a bigger group and you're one of the older girls, I mean, the younger girls are, looking for like a mom figure, right? Like they need something to give them comfort and that sort
Yeah.
of thing,
Yeah.
which is super tricky because you want to comfort them. And this is something that just makes me like so sad looking back. There's a level to which you can be kind and compassionate, but there's also a level in which you need to be hard to build up their calluses. Because the reality is, if you're all sweet and sensitive, and then, they end up going with the John, they come back, they're just a train wreck and that sort of thing, the pimp is then going to blame it on you for the fact that that child is now like way more emotionally unstable. So it's a tricky balance of trying to be able to comfort them, but then also like, it sounds terrible to say, but like give them like, okay, like here's, you have to not think about it, like find a song, sing a song in your head, practice your counting, do these different things, or giving them little tasks like, I want you to tell me, how many of this are in the room or how many of that, or whatnot, and that sort of thing. That way they can like get their mind onto something else.
What is your relationship like with your parents now? Or is
Mm-hmm.
there any?
Yes, good question. My biological dad and I actually have a decent-ish relationship. I say
Yeah.
biological because I'm adopted now, which
Yeah.
I'll get into that.
Yeah.
It's a super cool part of the story. But so
Yeah.
anyway, so yeah, my biological dad, and who I've been talking about this whole time, he and I have an okay relationship. He doesn't believe anything that happened. He doesn't
Huh.
believe that it could have happened without him knowing. Huge denial, that sort of thing. And he knows. I'm like, okay, well, it did happen. So, up to you what you're going to do with that, basically. So we just don't talk about it, which is probably not the best thing, but it's also what it is. And I'm a believer, and therefore I want to show him Jesus, show him the Lord. And as of right now, he's not doing anything for me to directly cut him out of my life. I did when I was, leaving and that sort of thing, 17. I wanted to move over to the east side. I moved over here when I was 17 to the east side of the mountains. And
By
he originally didn't want to let
by
by
yourself?
myself.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he did not originally want to let me leave. And I told him, I was like, here's the deal. You either let me go, right now I'm 17, or like the day I turn 18, I'm gone and you will never see or talk to me ever again. Up to you. It's your choice. And he decided to let me leave, which I'm thankful for.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that was kind of like the framework our relationship on is like, that's still what our relationship is built on, of
Okay.
let me do what I want. Otherwise, we're not having it. Or if he starts going and talking about something that I do not want to talk about, if he starts
Yeah.
like calling me a liar and poking me, and like I'll be like, keep talking, and I hang up the phone. If you say one more word, and I'll hang up the phone.
Yeah.
And then with my biological mom, I don't necessarily have a relationship with her, but I do in the sense of I have a little sister still, right?
Yeah.
She is 7 now.
Yeah.
And because of that, like I mean, I don't believe that she's being trafficked. My biological mom is with my little sister's father, so, and he is very controlling, very domineering, and so within that, this is terrible, but this is kind of how I see it, is he would have the mindset of, if anyone's going to abuse my kid, it's going to be me. And being the fact that he never sexually or physically abused me, I mean, I think he verbally has the potential to get very violent, but I'm not necessarily concerned for her physical safety.
Okay.
I mean, super controlling. I can't talk to my biological mom without him listening on the phone, sort of a thing. Super duper controlling. So yeah, I'm not overly concerned for her safety, but I fully believe that she will not live with them until she's 18. She will end up getting kicked out, most likely, probably somewhere in her teen years. And so I want to have enough of a relationship with her that when that does happen, like I can be a place that she comes to.
Yeah.
Also, stepdad's brother and his wife, amazing family. They've adopted 5 kids, had one miracle baby. They struggled with some infertility. So, anyway, they're an amazing couple. They love the Lord and that sort of thing. And so, that would be the other place that my little sister would be likely to end up, is either with them or with me. So, I just want to have enough of that relationship.
Right.
So, I go over usually on her birthdays. I try to talk to her every once in a while and that sort of thing. So that's the most relationship that I have with my biological mom, is whatever it takes to have a relationship with my sister.
Has
So
she ever apologized or take
no,
ownership for what happened to you?
not really. I talked to law enforcement at one point, and then that kind of it got back to her, which that's another part of the story. We did talk about it a little bit, but not anything substantial. So I mean,
Huh.
again, she's very very passive, and so I just really didn't expect anything else from her.
Do you hate her?
No. I will say she's been the hardest person to forgive. I mean,
Yeah.
people were always trying to convince me to talk to law enforcement, which again I did to an extent, which I can talk about that. But I mean, like forgiving the pimps and John the clients, I was like, yeah, no big deal. Like I never felt the need for anyone to be persecuted. I was like, I just want to live my life. Like
Okay.
the only extent to which I would like in which motivated me to talk with law enforcement in a capacity was the fact of I knew that there were other girls still out there. That was the only thing. But I mean, I was like, cool, yep, they're forgiven. But like
Okay.
forgiving my mom was the trickiest, and I'd like to say that I've done it. Maybe I have, maybe I haven't. I don't totally know. I like to,
Probably comes in
I
waves.
like to choose forgiveness, and then on days that I don't feel like it, remind myself that I already chose forgiveness. So
Yeah. So you said you left when you were 7 or got out when you were 17. What does that process look like?
yeah. So for me, how it looked, because again, I was kind of free to come and go to an extent.
Yeah.
I mean, I had even gone away for the summer 2 years and I'd be like, hey, leaving for this chunk of time. But it was all under the assumption that when I turned 18, I was going to move down to California to go be with that one group. It kind of starts with me learning about what trafficking was. So I went to coffee with a friend that I had met at a summer camp, same summer camp that I met the Lord. So anyway, we're talking, and she is one of seven girls, all biological. So it's mom, dad, seven daughters, and she's number two in the lineup. Very very sweet family, dear part of my story. Her and I are talking, and their family is very passionate about anti-sex trafficking efforts and that sort of thing. And she's telling me the story about how they're going to go to this hearing to support this girl who's being trafficked and testifying and that sort of thing, and how because her one of her sisters had like a pocket knife in her pocket and how she needed to go hide it in the bushes. And so that's kind of the nature of the story. And during that I'm like, well, what's trafficking? So then she tells me what it is, and as she's talking I'm like, shoot, that sounds really familiar. And that's when I kind of realized, like, okay, like maybe I'm being trafficked, and maybe that's what's happening here. And so then I was like, okay, well, I'm going to play out the waters, because I was convinced that like either I would get in trouble, and I didn't want to talk to law enforcement. Those were like, either they're going to hate me and tell me I'm so terrible for doing all these things, basically
Yeah.
being a prostitute, because I
Yeah.
knew in the Bible, like prostitutes were not okay. And that's more of the
Yes.
category I thought of myself in.
Uh-huh.
So I was like, they're either going to think I'm a prostitute and be mad at me,
Yeah.
or they're going to want me to talk to law enforcement, neither of which I like those paths. So I was like, okay, here's my plan. I'll tell them that it ended when I was in the sixth grade, because that's when I moved and got sold to that second group. I'm like, that's a
Okay.
great, breaking point. I can
Okay.
make that story believable because, I had to move and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like this will be great. And then if they are like, mad at me for being a prostitute, I can be like, well, I was young, like I didn't know better, right? And that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
So within that, there was a father figure again from that summer camp, and I told him like, "Hey, I want to tell you like that this happened when I was a kid." And he's like, "We have to tell law enforcement." And I was like, "That was not what I wanted to come out of this. Like, no."
Yeah.
So we ended up going to tell law enforcement. Absolutely, absolutely terrible experience. I did not want to tell them my name. I never wanted the father figure to leave my side. Like I was terrified to be in there because I'm still being trafficked
Yeah.
actively. Like
Yeah.
this was just a stepping stone to see what was going to happen. And now we're talking to law enforcement. And so we go into this room, and mind you, the person I was supposed to be talking with, he had gotten called in because there was a murder that early morning, night before. So I was talking with a different detective. And so we're talking probably for about 30 minutes. And then they're like, okay, let's take a quick break. And they asked the father figure that was with me. And they're like, hey, can we talk to you for a second? He leaves the room. They bring in another person. And then they just start grilling me. And like, I mean, just like, I mean, it started out mild and it just got more intense and more intense. And like, they started asking, well, when did you get your period? Like, you know, at what age did you get your period? Well, you must have gotten pregnant then, right? You must have been pregnant, right? Like, and just super like in my face. I mean, I was terrified. I didn't want to be there, and now they're asking me all these questions. And I mean, you
Why?
watch any cop show, and you know you're not supposed to ask leading questions. It's like, what are you doing here?
Why did they do that?
Probably because they didn't believe me,
Ah,
and maybe they could sense that there were gaps in my story because of the fact that I said it ended in the 6th grade, which didn't actually make sense.
right.
And the other thing, if people don't know about trafficking, like they're not going to get it. I mean, oftentimes there's memory gaps. Like I said, there's this huge separation, right? Of like, here's who I am when I'm being trafficked. Here's who I am when I'm not, right? Jasmine, Audrey, Jasmine, Audrey. So within that, like there might be gaps in memory and that sort of thing. And, you know, they just tend to not believe because the other thing is the stories are so crazy that they seem unbelievable. Like, you know, if I tell you like, oh yeah, like a guy could pay to murder a girl, you're like, no way.
Yeah.
No way. No way did you see a girl be born into trafficking literally. No way. That didn't happen.
Yeah.
Well, it did, right? So the
Yeah.
stories are just so extreme and so unbelievable that people's tendency is to not believe. And the reality is that most law enforcement is not educated on trafficking
Right.
because I mean, like I said earlier, the life expectancy of a victim is typically 7 years and 1% make it out. So not enough people to make it out for them to even know about it. And like it is probably less common for sure in small towns. So unless you're in a big town where it's super common, there's usually not like a trafficking unit.
Yeah.
And oftentimes no one in an agency is educated on trafficking. That's super common, right? So I mean,
That's
just completely set up for failure.
that's just surprising in this day and age where we talk about it a lot. But I guess we just
Yeah,
talk
but we
about
talk
it.
about it in foreign countries and with
Yeah.
foreign
Yeah.
children or in the
Yeah.
big cities. We
Yeah.
don't talk about it on the levels and scales in which it's actually happening.
Yeah.
So and
Yeah.
people just don't know enough about it to believe it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah. So and yeah, the father figure was removed. I kept asking. I was like, "Where is he? Where is he?" And they had locked him out. He told me after we were done that they had locked him out in the waiting room, and he kept knocking, like, "Hey, why am I not with her?" And they wouldn't
Yeah.
let him come back in.
Yeah.
So when we were done, I mean, the father figure that I came with, he's like, "I am so sorry. Like that is not how it was supposed to go." They
Wow.
questioned me for 2 or 3 hours, solo, no breaks, just question, question, question. I mean, I would say it was one of the most terrible experiences of my life, which is probably true outside of trafficking, because that's
Wow.
obviously
Yeah.
not great. But yeah, so that was the first time that I talked to law enforcement. And then the family of the 7 daughters, that whole family was also very close in the process. I had ended up deciding to tell them that like, hey, it's still happening. Like I need help.
Yeah.
And basically the way that I like tangibly left was I just stopped being available.
Yeah.
I would like just not be at the places that like I said I would be and not show up and be like, oh, I'm sorry, something came up. Oh, I'm sorry, something came up until I was ready to like move further away and then change everything, you know, on my phone, change everything on social media, all that kind of
They
stuff.
took those excuses? Your pimps?
Yeah, well, they trusted me. I mean, I had
Okay.
never shown any reason of being suspicious.
Yeah.
I had already gone for a whole summer. I had moved to the east side for a summer and come back.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
I was committed. I mean, the reality is like with the murder aspect and all that kind of stuff, they also portray it of like, well, we have dirt on you. Like you're responsible. You saw that, so now you're equally as in trouble as we are if anyone ever finds out. I mean, so you're just deeply committed. I mean, and again, it depends on the situation. This was just my situation of like there was an extreme level of trust. They also knew that I had been doing it since I was a kid,
Yeah.
and therefore like I was committed.
Yeah.
I planned to go to California and eventually they did start to get suspicious. There was one time after I started leaving and like making that effort where, you know, I ended up having to go back with them. They caught me while I was at home, so I went with them. And I mean, that time they definitely were violent. I left with a concussion after that night. I got thrown down on the ground and like passed out for I don't know how long. So I mean that last time I was there, they definitely were suspicious.
Yeah.
And then after that, I basically told the people who were helping me, I was like, okay, like now's the time to pull the trigger. I can't be here anymore.
Right.
Like if I go again, I'm gonna be gone for good or die. Like
Yeah.
one of the two.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah. So we ended up talking to law enforcement a second time, which did go better, but still pretty not great. I had written out a timeline of pretty much everything that I had remembered, that had happened. I wrote that out, went to them. They and I took another, the dad of the 7 daughters with me. They read it and they're like, well, here's your options. Option number one is you have to be completely willing to do anything that we ask you to do whenever we ask you to do it, to drop anything for any kind of investigation, tell us everything that we want to know, or drop it. And I was like, great, I'll drop it. Like, I don't want to be doing this. And that sounds extra terrible, which is just an absolutely terrible way to approach it. And they still didn't believe me at that point, obviously, to the extent of they ended up calling my mom. And I can't remember, my memory fails me if it was the first or second time that I talked to law enforcement, but they called my mom and they're like, here's what your daughter said, and gave them specifics on what I had told them. And then, or at
Oh
least I believe she
gosh.
said specifics because of the details she knew, unless she knew those already. But so then my mom decides to call my grandma, call my uncles, call my dad, anyone she can think of. That way they hear the story from her first, that Bree's making up this story and, it's not true. Which, I mean, my family's not stupid. They knew
Yeah.
my mom was fake. So
Yeah.
everyone was just confused and they didn't know what to believe. And I was not ready or willing to talk about it with
Right.
like really anybody. I did
Right.
have one aunt who called me. I was like, hey, like, I just want to say, like, your uncle and I are so sorry. Like, we didn't have kids yet. We knew something was going on. We didn't know what. We didn't know what to do about what we saw. Like, we're sorry.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was validating. And my grandma just wanted to understand. But like I had mentioned earlier, my grandma and I were super close. I mean, super close. And I just could not break her heart
Yeah.
by actually telling her like everything. I was like, I don't want to talk about it, grandma. I don't want
Yeah.
to talk about it. Which is kind of where that story, like, that's as far as we've ever gone talking about it.
Yeah.
So anyway, so yeah, so talked to law enforcement that second time, and then basically was like, cool, I'm never doing that again. I was 17, moved over for the summer camp thing again. I was an intern at a at-risk youth adventure ministry organization called YD. Love YD, they're super super great. So I was a part of that, stayed as a summer intern, and then I was like, okay, I need to find a place to live. I was 17, I couldn't sign a lease. I was still in high school. I was doing online running start from my school on the west side still. I was able to make that work. I mean, doing college classes, working like a job, right? And so anyway, I ended up getting someone to invite me to live with their family. It was a couple and their 6-month-old daughter. She worked at the ranch that I was interning at. I was originally only going to live with them until I turned 18. They ended up extending that offer. But one thing that I've been told is like, just they never would have thought of that, is that the eve before my 18th birthday, it all of a sudden dawned on me that I was terrified to fall asleep because I had never thought that I was going to make it to live past 18. I literally stayed up for so long because I was convinced I was going to die in my sleep because I never thought that I would actually end up living to making it to 18.
Yeah.
Like, they were like, it's okay. You're going to be alive when you wake up. I was like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
So I mean, just extreme. Yeah, I ended up living with that family until I graduated high school. They extended their offer, loved having me live with them, which was extremely helpful because that's the year of COVID. So if I would have moved out, I would have been like doing online running start while working a job, trying to finish my senior year, living on my own during COVID. Thankfully, that was not the case, and I was living with this family who, was able to experience it with a family. So anyway, I ended up graduating in 2020, class of COVID, and then I moved out into an apartment and was working as a personal assistant for a music producer and his wife, which that was a crazy, awesome experience. Very crazy, lots of stuff. I was like, oh, this is a whole new world,
Yeah.
And my church was doing this school. That's like a Bible school, and they had done some like kind of classes and that sort of thing before that for young adults. But this was like a 9 month, take the next 9 months to get the next 50 years right type of school. And I was like, I want to do that. But I had committed for this personal assistant job for 2 years. I ended up sitting down with the couple I was being an assistant for. And it was like, hey, would you be okay if I broke our commitment and like went to do this? They knew my story. And I was like, I just feel like I just need to do this school. And they actually ended up paying for a large majority of the cost.
Wow.
My cost of doing the school was completely covered, largely by them, and a couple other parties I think jumped in and helped. No one ever told me. It was like I wasn't supposed to know who the money came from, just that it
Yeah.
got paid for.
Yeah.
Which I was very thankful for because I didn't know how it was going to be paid for,
Yeah.
but I knew that the Lord would provide. And the other thing was housing, because they didn't provide housing with the school. So, and most of the people were living with their parents who were doing it. I was like the only one who wasn't living with my parents. So I was like, okay, what am I going to do? Well, this family, the Burnett's, they had offered to let me live with them. And their son, Austin, actually knew. So they have 5 sons and a daughter. And one of their sons already knew my story because he worked at the time going overseas and helping to rescue kids from sex trafficking. That was his job. He had
Wow.
super sleuthed, found out that there was this girl in the valley who had been trafficked. I mean, it's just wild. He's like such a little detective. Found out that this girl in the valley had been trafficked, like saw me at church, asked people like, who is that? What's her story?
Yeah.
And nobody knew, right? They're like, well, we don't really know. And looked me up on social media, didn't find me anywhere. Like, that's gotta be her. And the deal was sealed when I reached out because I had found out that, he did that for work and I didn't know that. And so I reached out and I was like, hey, I'd love to hear more about what you do. Super passionate about anti-sex trafficking efforts. He told me pretty much that he knew. He was like, I think that I know that you have been and I was like, trafficked, and he's like, yeah. And I was like, cool.
Yeah.
He was so nervous to like say it anyway. And he had actually encouraged me to talk with law enforcement again. And I was like, I don't know about that. He did end up convincing me, and we met with a law enforcement officer that went to our church. I knew him through a lot of different people, had like recommended this guy to me. Ended up talking with him. He wasn't in uniform, that sort of thing. He ended up convincing me to, talk with this gal from the FBI that he used to work with when he worked on the West Side and was in a trafficking unit, that sort of thing. He's like, this is the gal I work with. She's super great. Ended up talking with her. And I mean, that was just a super validating experience in the end because everybody involved was like, yes, I believe you. We just don't have enough information to like do anything about it at this point in time.
Yeah.
But now, if anyone else steps up, then we have more information. Maybe we can do something. So that was super validating. So anyway, I'm about to do this school. Back to kind of where I'm at now. Need a place to live, and the Burnett's, this family, offers to let me live with them for super cheap rent. All of the boys were moved out of the house at that point in time. They're all older, and then their daughter is a little bit younger than me, about a year and a half. So I moved in with them, originally in the basement, eventually ended up moving into the upstairs with the family just to be more of a part of the family and what was going on. And started to become really close. And what I didn't know is the dad of that family, in October, he had gone on a retreat called the Word Retreat. And the Lord just put it on his heart that like he needed to adopt me. He's like just
Huh.
overwhelming, and even more so than he needed to adopt me, but that like in that moment I was now his daughter.
Oh.
Like he had like the Lord had just given him the love of a father for me, and there was nothing, whether or not they ever legally adopted me, like
Yeah.
he's like that love wouldn't have gone away. Like I had the love of a father for you. And it
Yeah.
wasn't like I wanted you to become my daughter. You were my daughter and I just needed to seal the deal.
Yeah.
Like it's like I had been missing you for the last 20 years and
Oh,
like my lost daughter
jeez.
returned home.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I had been living with them 5 months later, December 19th. He and his wife sat down and were like, hey, can we adopt you? And they gave me this whole little spiel, and they're like, and we totally get if you need to take time to think about it. And I was like, what makes you think that I need time to think about it? And like that was just kind of like everyone chuckled, and I didn't realize that was a funny answer. But anyway, and so said yes. It was pretty cool. I have a promise ring that family of 7 daughters, the parents gave me, and it comes with a little key. It's like a little heart with a lock in it. It comes with a little key. And I had already pre them asking to adopt me, had written up a letter asking the Burnett family like if they would be willing to like, guard the little key to my heart, which is basically symbolizing like they're like the people who would walk me through a relationship if and when that comes.
Yeah.
So anyway, and it was kind of me asking them to be my unofficial parents, right? Which then they asked to adopt me. So then it was me asking them to actually be my parents. We got home from church. I turned around and asked them the question. Super cool. 11 days later, my name was changed and I was
Wow.
adopted.
Wow.
The other part of it that was super crazy is so my dad, talking about my current parents here, not the biological ones. My dad at the time was the elected sheriff of Chelan County,
Yeah.
Brian Burnett. So, I mean, he was a cop,
Yeah.
which I
Yeah.
was terrified of cops.
Yeah.
And so, like, I went from being like terrified of cops, having all these terrible experiences, to now my dad is not only like a law enforcement officer, but like the sheriff of our county. And I was like, this is wild. Like, absolutely wild. And I mean, yeah, now I have the eldest brother's in law enforcement, the next one's a real estate agent, and then the one who was going overseas and doing the anti-sex trafficking efforts, he's now like in the special forces. Then the next one I currently live with, and he does like fiber stuff, and then the other one's a ranger. So I mean, just a bunch of like guys going out and getting stuff done. It's like I always joke that I have I'm like, man, it's got to be intimidating. If a guy ever is interested in me, like, not only like was my dad the sheriff, I got like all these like, five brothers and like a mom that's scarier than all of them. And then I have my sister who's like the sweetest thing, on planet Earth, who would never be intimidating to anybody. But
Oh
so anyway, so yeah,
gosh.
I got adopted at the age of 20 years old, which I mean, growing up, I'd always wanted to be adopted, especially once I knew the Lord. And I mean, I just was like, Lord, like, why is this the family you gave me? Like, and I just knew that there was something better out there. And I
Yeah.
mean, I remember I was 18, 19. That desire when I lived in the apartment by myself, I was like, I want a family. And I knew that I had to resolve that I was never going to be able to get a family, that
Yeah.
was just out of the picture for me. And I just had to be okay with that. And like, never would I have thought that like the Lord was going to provide a family when I was 20 years old, getting adopted as a legal adult to a family with five brothers and a sister, like,
Yeah.
and legally. And I
Yeah.
think the legal aspect was so important for me because I have had so many families take me in. They'll introduce me as their surrogate daughter. They're like, oh, this is like my unofficial daughter. Like,
Yeah.
so many families, multiple families considered adopting me throughout the years. I know now. But the thing is like, those people would usually enter and then leave my life. Like all these families that I was a part of their family, it didn't mean anything to me anymore, really. Like it did in the moment, but I knew that they were temporary and
Huh.
family's supposed to be forever, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like that, those are your people. And so I think for
Yeah.
me, the legal aspect was crucial. And
Yeah.
like taking their name, I remember after they asked to adopt me, I had shared, with my dad, like a really hard part of my story, like a part that I really don't share with like most people. And I was like, "Do you have any questions?" Like super nervous, and he was just like, "Yeah, just one. So, do you want to take our last name?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "That was not what I thought you were gonna say." And I was like, "Of course I want it. Give it to
Yeah.
me."
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, wow, that is like so many emotions. I don't even know what to say. To rewind back a little bit, did your pimps ever go looking for you?
There were a couple instances where people tried to grab me and like that sort of thing, but managed to avoid that. So there is one story, if before we end, if you're cool with, if I could share.
Yeah, please.
So basically, during the time that I was trafficked, in between like Johns and clients and that sort of thing, whenever I would get a chance, I would go over to the window and I would look out and I would just wonder, like, is there anyone looking back who cares about me? Because I just felt alone. I felt isolated. I felt like nobody cared. And I would just look out and I'm like, there's a whole world out there. Like, does anyone even know that I'm here or care or anything like that? And so basically, once I left trafficking, I began to make a point of looking out the window every night and like praying for those girls and just thinking of them and look back, right? I was now on the other side of the window pane and I was like, I'm just going to look back. And my dad one day, asked me what I was doing looking out the window all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I told him, I was like, I'm looking back and praying for those girls. And I shared that story. And I then asked him, I was like, do you want to join me? And so basically just, for anyone who's like, man, like, I don't know what to do about this. Like, you just gave me, a ton of information. I don't know how to mentally, emotionally process this. Like, this is a lot. Like, or like, what do I do? And, I feel like trafficking is pretty hard to kind of get involved with outside of donating. And so that's why my call to people is just to look back and to take, a couple seconds every day and look out your window and to pray for those girls, because that's the thing that's going to make the biggest difference in their life is your prayers. And I know for me, like one day, Lord willing, when I meet more gals who have been trafficked, like I want to be able to look at them and tell them, like, hey, you were never alone. God was always with you. And not only was God always with you, but I have been looking back every day for the last 5 years since I've left, looking back at you because I want you to know that I care about you, that you are loved, you are seen, you are worthy, you are more than what you ever told that you were, and you have a life outside of trafficking. And mainly, you are not alone. And so that's just my call to people, is to take the time to look out your window, because I guarantee that any night, at any time you look out, that there's probably some little girl somewhere around the world looking out, wondering if there's anyone looking back who cares.
Yeah. How do you not hate your life?
Because God's going to use it. And that's why I speak, is because for me, I can't not say anything. I mean, eight of the children that I was with during the years died, right? That's during the time that I was there, during the 9 years that I was there.
Yeah.
I can't not say anything, because if I don't, more kids are just going to die. More kids, more women are just going to get lost. More stories are never going to be heard. And so I can't sit and not do anything about it. That's why I'm here. That is why I'm not dead. I mean, for so long, I used to think, like, why me? Like, why? So many people, when they get out, they can't emotionally cope with everything that they've been through. I mean, I struggle. Since I've left, I've been out for over 5 years, and I have had 11 nights without nightmares. That's it. 11 nights out of over, 1,000, whatever, 11. Every other night, I'm back there being trafficked again in my mind from a nightmare. I can't just sit and not do anything about it.
Well, I think most people who hear your story, if you did sit and not do anything about it, they would understand too. I mean, not to encourage you to do that.
Yeah. Oh, I won't.
Yeah. It sounds like you've surrounded yourself with people who won't let you do that at this point.
Yeah. And I mean, the Lord has always blessed me and the people that I've been around. I never fell into the wrong crowd. I've never had a boyfriend, never gone out and chosen to make, any of those decisions, putting myself in one of those situations. Like, I always was surrounded with good friends and good people. And so, I think reality, I just didn't have time for boys who were just going to use me. It's already being used enough. So yeah, I'm excited, for the day that, Lord willing, I get married and have kids. And in the meantime, I mean, right now, before I'm married and have kids, that's the most ground that I'll ever have to go run out and go share my story to as many people as will listen.
Oof, that was a lot. And it was intense. And I can't believe you're able to tell it in that way. And what do we do? Look
out your window and pray. Find organizations that help. Look and find organizations that are doing something. Organizations like 3W, like the clinic I work for. Because, 80% of women who are trafficked have gone to a medical provider at some point. So supporting places that are going to have their eyes open and to look and to see. Find organizations that are specifically doing anti-sex trafficking efforts. Look for legislation that's passing through. Don't allow prostitution to be legal, because most prostitution very rarely happens in the sense of actual prostitution. It almost always immediately shifts into human trafficking.
Yeah.
Any gal that is a prostitute is almost always being trafficked, or quickly will be trafficked.
That makes sense.
So, look for legislation that you can support, sign bills, whatever it be, and be aware. Look around. Is there someone who's struggling? Don't be afraid to talk about it. Tell someone you know, hey, did you know that trafficking happens in the U.S. to kids that aren't foreign? That it happens to kids. It happens to adults. All that kind of stuff.
Well, I'm so grateful that you trust us enough to come on our podcast and tell your story. I think in some ways, like, I want to be in denial about it, because it's just too horrific for me to even wrap my brain around that's that much evil in the world. Because I look at you and I see so much hope. Thanks for telling your story, and I'm sure we're just scratching the surface of it, because it's much more complex than that. Yeah.
Thanks for letting me speak on it.
For our listeners out there, we'll just take what Bree's suggesting to us, is just keeping in mind that there's much more to people's stories and lives and complexities to it than we like to think. Get involved if this is something that has touched your heart, to not be silent about it, because there might be someone in your life that's dealing with something like this. All right. Well, thanks, folks, for tuning in today. I'm sure we'll have Bree back, because I have so many other questions, but thanks for listening.
For more information about 3W, please visit our website at 3wmedical.org. That's the number 3, the letter W, medical.org. From there, you can learn more information about the services we provide, book an appointment, or make a donation if you'd like to support our mission. You can also call our office at 206-588-0311. That's 206-588-0311. If you like this episode, please share it with others and consider subscribing on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, stay healthy and be well.